Okay, and welcome to TechReckoning Fest 5. It's November 14th, here with our next guest to kick things off, Rosemary Wang from HashiCorp. Really pleased to have her with us, a developer advocate there. And we'll get started right now for a little conversation and then a little bit of a woo and a little bit of a slide. And a little bit of a slideshow. Well, not slideshow, actually. No slides. It's just going to be demo. Rosemary, go ahead and unmute yourself, or I can. And welcome. Let me take this one off. Rosemary,
how's my audio?
You sound okay. You know,
Okay
is good enough these days. Okay is good enough. It's magic that it even works. This is kind of Star Trek-like. The fact that we actually aren't really in synchronous, like it's a little bit async, but it still all works out of the box. And although, the audio and video is compressed to shit. But anyway, that's the world. That's the imperfect world we live in. Rosemary, hey, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about you, get to know you. Now, you will not be at KubeCon next week, but you were in Velocity over in Berlin. You have a tendency to show up.
Yes.
You work out of Jersey City in the New York area on the East Coast, and you are a developer advocate for HashiCorp, and we're going to talk a little bit about console and service meshes and some things like that. Actually, service meshes ended up coming up a lot in my pre-conversations with people, so a topic worth talking about.
Very cool.
I don't know, but let me ask you a little bit about yourself and I just tweeted right before the show here that you have an interesting background, and just because I don't know, how do you see? So many folks on here are bloggers or invested in the community in various technical communities. And for years, we've had this conversation about technical marketing and technical evangelism and, even before the technical advocacy, developer advocacy. And there's kind of as many views of a developer advocate as almost as there are developer advocates, also career path, things like that. I don't know. What do you see the role of a developer advocate, at least as you do it?
Yeah, I've always sort of been a developer advocate in some way, shape, or form, even without the title. And I think that's what sort of drew me to the role in the first place. Part of it was that people would ask me, oh, how do I do this? And then I'd sort of sit there and be like, I don't know, actually, let's sit and figure it out. And sometimes it was a really weird integration. Sometimes it was a new technology. And over time, I realized I was building education resources, not just because of someone else consuming it, but because I would forget how I did it. And I would always go back to it. And it just turned out to be really useful for someone else. And so all of these patterns and resources that I was thinking about and working with others, I was sort of like, hey, that's actually important in an open source community in particular. So I love to empower our open source community within the HashiCorp ecosystem. There are 6 tools that are all open source, so it's a massive ecosystem to help out with. And usually the community is great about promoting their own resources, how they learned it, and some of the integrations and features they're building. And it's my job to sort of bring those to attention and connect some of the dots in this massive ecosystem as well.
Right. Do you report, we're going to get into org charts here, which is funny if people know me, but do you report up into marketing, or do you report up into product?
So we report up into marketing, but we're extremely cross-functional. It's most of the time we're hands to keyboard writing the code. So we know a lot about sort of the engineering approach. We have to learn that as well as part of being a HashiCorp developer advocate.
Right.
We have to know about the product aspects. So what's going to happen next. And we certainly have to also know about messaging and being sort of a public facing.
Right. And sometimes, so now, we're talking about the role. So, developer advocates, one of the problems with them, with technical marketing, evangelists, they're the same kind of, they're similar roles that they can be different. But sometimes you're forced to wear a lot of hats, like you just said, right? You're in a smaller company, and HashiCorp is now not smaller, but you're not Dell. In a smaller company especially, you're expected to write blog posts, write code, maybe overlay, maybe you're a little bit of a sales overlay, a pre-sales overlay, maybe you're a customer success post-sales overlay. So you have customer meetings. Hopefully you're not customer support, but sometimes you're coming up with demos for presentations, or demos on your own time, or demos. Sometimes you're coming up with collateral, like tech marketing, should be doing around releases, or a role usually called tech marketing. Collateral for the website, like slide decks and stuff, or white papers. And in the meantime, you're also, most places you're expected to travel. So, how is it for you? How do you balance, balancing all this?
I think that the travel is important, at least in my individual view, to interface with the community that doesn't always get FaceTime, right? It's really hard. In North America in particular, we always have the privilege of being able to fly out and see someone face to face and have that interaction. But there are a lot of communities out there who may not have access to some of the resources for a variety of reasons. And so flying to them and traveling there is very practical. It gives them the opportunity to express and bring concerns right to our attention within the open source product. So that's the great part about travel and selecting the travel. I balance that with what material is reasonable to go online as sort of a more permanent artifact that someone will find useful and go back and refer to it. So I think that the balance is always difficult. There's definitely a discussion about burnout in general in the tech industry and balancing that specifically in developer advocacy. So it's definitely an ongoing struggle, but I try to err on the side of blog posts and as much virtual material as possible.
Nice. Well, you do travel. So, and I notice, I notice a plant in the background of your screen. So you're based out of the New York area. How do you? I take it I know this. We prep this ahead of time. I can't even. I have such a terrible poker face. Take all my money. So so we talked about that. You do like gardening, indoor gardening, and plants. And I'm kind of curious how how do you aren't the poor little critters, how do you not neglect them as you travel? I guess you back and forth.
Yeah, I have learned, just like software architecture, to understand the constraints and find plants that fit the lifestyle. So a number of my plants are not water intensive plants. I learned my lesson after the first few, and the only one that is probably the most finicky is the African violet. And for the most part, it was fine. More recently, it's taken a turn for the worse because I transplanted it to a larger pot. So sadly, that's probably the only one that's suffering.
Yeah, those are kind of finicky. I know. I associate African violets with, my elderly aunts, and I just remember as a child being told not to put water over the leaves, just be very gentle with them. It's in the same way I tell children not to smack my dog, to pet it very gently. Anyway, the dog is, sleeping here. Let's kind of move on. So you've been at HashiCorp for how long now?
Almost a year.
Awesome. And anything, and so I don't know, this is not a question I believe I asked you. Anything surprising, most surprising thing, least surprising thing, most fun thing, I guess I won't make you to say the least fun thing you've done this last year.
I was most surprised by the remote friendly culture, which it's shocking to me because I came from a place where I had to go into the office, and there was a value to FaceTime, and there was a value to doing software delivery face-to-face within a team physically co-located. And so it's just surprising to me how much you can get done when everybody is remote and has to normalize on a way of working with the remote kind of process in mind. So it's just surprising to me how much you can do asynchronously. And HashiCorp is always trying to reinvent ways of doing remote better, and that's actually fantastic.
That is pretty cool. Without throwing my own team under the bus, if only one, sometimes we would think about hiring one person remote. But if your whole team is not remote, the one person, and I've talked with other people who have done this, right? And if only one person is remote, it's really not fair, and the team isn't set up for that. So you almost have to be kind of set up for the remote people, because there's so many conversations that happen over the cube wall, or if you're not organized, you just say, hey, let's have a meeting right now, and don't tell anybody about it in a different time zone.
Yeah.
Well, so you're not going to be at KubeCon. HashiCorp will be there. If folks want to reach out, and we'll connect people who are live here, or if you have any questions. But if other names to look out for, do you know who else is going to be there?
Yes. So we're going to have a booth at, I believe, S27. I hope that is the right number. I don't know what that
people
means.
Just look for the signs.
Exactly. One of my awesome teammates whose content you'll see today, his name is Nick Jackson. He's on Twitter at Sheriff Jackson. Sorry, Nick.
Awesome.
But he will actually be doing a talk, and so you can watch out for that. I don't remember when it is, but it is on the schedule. And we also will have Melissa Green, who's responsible for the community team, and she'll also be at the booth. And we'll definitely have a number of the HashiCorp team there at the booth and milling about too. So definitely keep an eye out.
Nice. Very cool. Melissa, for folks that don't know, actually, folks may know her actually from her days at EMC and even with a stint in Speaking in Tech podcast. So I love Melissa. She's awesome. Well, let's get to the hands-on portion of our show here. I said to Rosemary, I don't want marketing slides in this thing, and she's like, "Well, I don't have any slides. I'm just going to code." So, Rosemary, I'm going to hand it over to you and show us some stuff.
Awesome.
I think people, I characterize the folks here as being, Kubernetes knowledgeable, but maybe not Kubernetes experts. So we don't need the 101. We tend to be infrastructure-y, ITE, and not developer-y. But I don't want to mischaracterize. I don't want to insult anybody. But anyway, so take it away and show us what's cool right now.
Awesome.
With console and some things like that.
Awesome. So these are not marketing slides. This is just a diagram because I realized it was very confusing to explain. So how's that? Everybody you can see that?
Awesome.
It's a browser.
Yep.
So it's interesting because the first time I heard about service mesh was 2 years ago. And the first thing that someone told me was, we need a service mesh. And I said, what? What does that even mean? And so I had a really difficult time understanding what the story was behind why we needed one and what was the purpose. So after some time and after playing around in the space, and when console came out, there was a story that came out of a project that I did. And I was like, wait a second, if we had console service mesh, it would have probably made it easier. So this is a little bit of that story. I know I briefly said no slides, but it's easier to understand with the diagram.
Mm-hmm,
Sadly,
sure.
It's just hard to, put it all together.
As long as they're, just some boxes and arrows, or one or two is always fine. But
yeah. Exactly. So the important part about this was kind of to set the stage. It started because there was a giant monolithic application. And for those who are less familiar with the software architectures, right, the monolithic architecture is a little bit like a ball of mud at times, right? It's a lot of functionality sort of dumped together in one body of code. And what we ended up sort of deciding was that this was a lot of functionality to put in one place. So why don't we split it up? And to make it even better and to take advantage of cool technologies and cloud elasticity, why don't we put it in the cloud on Kubernetes? That's a lot harder to do than just say, I'm going to just put something on Kubernetes, right? It's an older application. The code hasn't been really looked at in a long time. It's really hard to change. So refactoring and replatforming isn't a trivial task. And you run a really high risk of doing something wrong as a result. So this is sort of a representation. If you look at the left side of this, let me just zoom into here. It's a bit of a representation of sort of how we split this monolith, right?
Okay, I'm still seeing. I've got a Velocity Workshop.
Oh, interesting. That's not the right
up
one.
on my screen.
All right, hold on. Let me just check the right desktop. There we are. That's the right desktop. Okay, there we are.
Okay, this is a slide.
Perfect. So it comes down to, there was a web front end that was very difficult. Like, you don't want to change something on users that quickly. So we kept the web front end piece, and that was on premises. So it was a data center, and it was hosted in a VM. And then there was a API behind that, and the API did some, let's say, transactional logic. I'm not going to go into too much of what it did, but all of this was on the data center. And in order for us to gain a little bit of confidence on whether or not if it even worked on Kubernetes, right? We refactored the API, and it seemed to be working fine on premise, but we didn't know if it would work in Kubernetes or not. There are a whole bunch of things you have to wire up, right? So we were like, all right, we have to move it to Kubernetes, but it's a little dangerous. We don't know if it works or not. We don't know how users will react. If there's some latency issues, we don't know if there's something that we've disconnected, and we just don't know what's going on. So to mitigate the risk, because it was a very risk-averse organization, we said, all right, why don't we use a blue-green approach, which meant blue on the premise and green in Kubernetes. So that's where you see this blue and green line here.
Gotcha. And to be super clear, the two gray boxes over on the back, that's a that was a legacy. That's a legacy app in VMs. We didn't rewrite
Precisely.
it. It's not cloud native friendly. Gotcha.
No, not at all. So we had to take a portion of it and see if we could at least make it doable on Kubernetes. And the API piece was more doable than the web piece. So we managed to get the API in a container. It works locally. That was what everybody was saying, like it works locally, but we have no clue if it works with web. And at the time, we just had to wire it up in these weird ways. It was just complicated, right? We had load balancers everywhere. We had, DNS entries that were waiting between on-premise and cloud, and then the cloud endpoints were messed up. Security was upset because they had no way of understanding where the requests were going. There wasn't visibility across on-premises and cloud. So, and when I thought about it more and I learned about some of the features within the console kind of ecosystem that we have at HashiCorp, I was like, hey, some of the things in console could help with this. So brief introduction into console. Console's for service networking, right? It does a lot of things. And a couple of things that it does do is service discovery. So it keeps a catalog. So as you can see here, it keeps a lovely catalog of the services that you have in your environment. You can also use it for a service mesh, and it's less about the service mesh and more importantly about the features that you get from using it, right? So you can use intentions to deny traffic, for example. So if I wanted to, I could say, hey, from an intent-based network policy standpoint, I can prevent API or web from talking to API. I can deny the traffic. And that's done on layer 4. And there's also a lovely key value store as well. This is kind of just, where it came from. So you can store configuration in here too.
Rosemary, let's back up one sec. I mean, we're going to end up talking about service mesh a couple times today.
Yeah.
And I think everybody here kind of, you get it by the name, but I mean, this is, it's a control. Let's see, this is control plane, not data plane, right? So it's not a router. But it is kind of and it's not a firewall, but it is something that is orchestrating endpoint, at least connecting endpoints. And in this case, okay, you said it's denying traffic on layer 4, but if API can't talk to itself, the API container can't talk to itself. It's also enforcing that, I guess, because are the network connectivity it would be running through console?
Yep. Yeah, so it would all be running through console. And it's actually a combination of control plane.
I was going to say, yeah, then it would need to, yeah. I contradicted myself.
Yeah, it's a combination of control plane and the data plane. And this is just by the architecture of the tool console itself, right? So console has a cluster, and that's actually the data plane. And what you see as sort of like the gray Envoy boxes are technically embedded into console clients. So the clients themselves are just for routing the data, kind of forwarding things, taking the rules from the console cluster, which is the control plane, and orchestrating across it. So it's kind of like software-defined networking, but you can't really call it software-defined networking. It's not layer 3, layer 2, layer 3. Yeah. It's more like layer 4 and layer 7.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about your background. I mean, you've worked at a number of institutions in real life and implemented virtualization and software-defined networking and a bunch of different areas. So you've seen some shit go down. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the thing is that I wished for a long time that I had one view, right? I wish I could do this easily and just say, hey, my intent is to stop API from talking to web or API from talking to database. I wish I could do this really easily. And it turns out it's not that it's not that difficult here because it's layer 7 and to a certain degree layer 4. And we make it easy, right? From an operational standpoint. So it's operational complexity that makes it extremely difficult to sometimes do these migrations from on-premises to cloud.
Oh yeah.
Kubernetes. Yeah. So, that's basically kind of the overview of Consul very, very quickly, but to show kind of why this was really useful in this story, there will be code. So part of this is that in this particular situation, you'll notice here that there is on-prem. So there's a console console control plane in the on-premise deployment, right? So this is specifically on-premise. But what's really cool is that you can say, I also have a console control plane in the cloud as well. So I can basically say, hey, this console, these two clusters, these two control planes can connect to each other and talk to each other. And the result is that they have visibility into the services across both, which is really interesting. So here I have on-premise, I just switch it, and you can see that I have a couple of services, web, API.
Rosemary, before somebody chimes in from the audience, I don't care, but some people it starts to bug them when people say when the people don't say on premises. Yeah. So I'm trying to be funny, but that wasn't very funny. Anyway, keep going. It's premises. Stick with on-prem. Yeah.
On-premise, on-premises. A lot of people have I say data center most of the time, but a lot of people have a very difficult time with this.
We're all friends here. I'm just kind of kidding. That was supposed to be jocular, but it ended up kind of. I ended up like you just like shat on the floor or something. Anyway, keep going.
No, it's okay. No, I'm just reading the question. So intent-based networking, most networking, someone asked a question about what's intent-based networking. Most networking, when you talk about network policy, is 10.0.0.0/24 shouldn't talk to 10.1.0.24, something like that. And the problem is that you don't understand the intent, right? Why are you telling me that these two subnets can't talk to each other? What's the point, right? And so I think that it's really difficult sometimes in network engineering to say this particular IP address range or this network belongs to this application. There's no description of why. There's no real description of what. And it's an extremely difficult thing. Most people do it through spreadsheets, actually. Or CMDB, so the configuration management databases. Mm-hmm. And what's different about intent-based networking is that
everybody here has a very clean set of firewall rules that are not years old and do not have entries that they're afraid to remove because they don't know what would happen. Anyway, everyone here, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Firewall entries, they're so beautiful and clean. I love a good, clean firewall entry, but it's like a unicorn. I've never really actually seen it. But it's hard to say that a network belongs to something. It's hard to assess impact. So intent is saying these are the networks or these are the resources that belong to this service, right? So it could be web, it could be API, you could call it transactions, you could call it payments, but you clearly understand that it's mapping to a specific intent. So you're able to say web can't talk to database, but app can talk to database if you're going through like a 3-tier app. So it's a very kind of different model of network policy.
Chris, does that make sense? You don't have to answer. Just nod your head. We can't see you.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So intent is actually really powerful because in this case, I'm saying I have some kind of on-prem, I have cloud, right? And, where do they go? How do I know if I'm going to on-prem? And to be honest, my fake service here, which is a fake service, it has the web component, which is what you're seeing right now. And what's saying it's connecting to the API on-prem. And the reason why it's connecting to localhost is it's connecting through that data plane. So that client or that proxy that you've seen in this here, this is a client, proxy, etc. It's connecting to localhost, and localhost is going to figure out where it's got to go, right? So in this case, it's all going to on-prem. And what I could do is, if I wanted to live really dangerously and actually apply some configuration, what I'm going to do is apply first a resolver. And what it actually will say is that it will clarify some intent, right? Because otherwise, in any kind of other network situation, I would say you're not allowed to go to cloud. And I would have to say the specific DNS and very specific address, right? So I have to say like 10 dot whatever cloud. You're not allowed to go there, or you are allowed to go there. And here, what I'm saying is, if the name is API cloud, API-cloud, I just go to the API service in my cloud data center. That's it. And the side effect of this, or the reason why this is actually pretty interesting, is that you can actually use it to split some of the traffic. So here, what I'm saying is that right now, 100% of my traffic is going to default, which is on-prem. And then there's also this lovely little piece here that says right now there's nothing going to API-cloud. Makes it really simple. And all I'm going to say is maybe I'll just add that there. So I'm just going to go in and say I'm going to go 50%. And let's live dangerously. All I have to say is maybe I'll just do 100% to my Kubernetes cluster. So keep in mind that it's all in the Kubernetes cluster right now. And I'm just going to split the traffic. All right, so hopefully this works. But the idea is that now my fake service will be pointing to cloud. So what's really neat about this is that I didn't have to look for the IP address of the cloud namespace. I didn't have to look for a DNS or setup load balancing to figure out where it was going to go. I pretty much just said to the proxies and to the data plane, hey, it's got to go to cloud, and it's got to go to this particular data center, which is in the cloud. So you can do a lot of powerful things with this. In the microservices space, if you're doing something with a bunch of containers in Kubernetes, you could also do additional traffic shaping like outlier detection. You can do circuit breaking, et cetera. So you have a lot of traffic management capability as well. Any questions?
So with, and not to get in too deep, we're going to hear a lot about, we're hearing a lot about service mesh. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the olden days when we did everything by hand, or no, in the olden days we did bearskins and stone knives, with picking a, virtualization in the virtual stack, picking a virtual router, picking which set of NICs, which set of things inside the VM I'm going to install, which virtual router I'm going to use. Now, a few years later, it's one of those things where from far away, it's like, well, that seems too much detail. Kind of the middle ground is like, wait a minute, there's too many choices. And then when you're in it, it's like, well, the answer, what I should do this week is this is what I should do. And then there might be some, I'm following, release by release, patch by patch. And then the answer may eventually, hopefully, settles down somewhere in this particular use case as I use this particular stack. So without drawing the analogy too close, where are we kind of from your perspective in the service mesh landscape journey? Because I see people complaining about Istio, complaining about service meshes in general, comparing the difference. I don't want to get into the comparison here, but too much, but and then a lot of people saying you don't need one. I talked with one of our speakers who's going to come up a little bit, who said it would be irresponsible to deploy without one. So and I don't know where are we in this, and how long is it going to take to settle down in your opinion, Rosemary?
Probably as long as it takes for the Kubernetes ecosystem to settle down, right? It's a pattern. I think it's a very useful pattern. It's got some really powerful ways that you can control traffic and in some ways mitigate risk in a variety of ways. You don't have to have it, but it sometimes just reduces the operational complexity just a little bit. But until it reduces it by a lot, right? It makes it super simple to deploy, to also see from a single point of view what kind of traffic you have, then I don't know. We'll see. To be honest, it's probably going to be a pattern that's going to be around for a while. But whether or not we see it at in mass scale production everywhere is going to be a different story.
Right. I don't know. Was that we prepped a little bit. I don't know. Do you have some more to talk about, or was that your demo so far?
That was it. I mean, I could go into way more, but
do you have an example for us in the cheap seats of a configuration file that might be show off a little bit more stuff?
Yeah, of course. So let me paste this in the chat. There is I'm going to paste this. I had this on Chrome before. Mesh.demo.js is, it has a set of slides and a full set of a walkthrough that we did at Velocity last week, I believe. And so that's going to have a lot of dense information. In terms of additional configuration, I can definitely share it right now if you've got time. But
yeah, we've got a couple minutes. I built in some time.
Awesome. So let me actually pop this open to this here.
Because again, sometimes just kind of looking through the file can give you a lot of give you a glimpse into like, okay, what's going on in the guts here.
Yeah, so this is the actual console configuration. So this is configuration of the control plane for console. So what you can see is that I've declared that my data center is on-prem. Right now I've only got one instance, so it's really not terribly complicated. I'm here saying turn on the service mesh capability, so it's enable true. There are a couple of IP addresses in here just to say, hey, advertise this. What you'll notice here is there's advertise address and advertise address WAN. So if you imagine this from a networking standpoint, your data NIC would be on this advertise address. That's with your clients, so that's usually within a data center. The WAN is across data centers. So your WAN would be more like a management NIC, so your management interface. So here I have a management interface that will connect with the other data center, which is cloud. And you can configure it as long as there's routing between the two, you can have any advertise address, generally speaking. And there are a lot of little configurations here and there. Like for example, we have a gateway, and the gateway kind of proxies locally. So it kind of controls the passing between data centers. So it's a little bit like a gate point to just say, hey, do you go to the other data center or not? So the configuration is pretty short.
Right. The cool. That gives us. I mean, clearly all the stuff is all the docs are, online, etc. Well, let me ask you this. I think I'm going to ask everybody this. Actually, you come from an IT background. And I'll stop you here. Is there anything as you're teaching people and as you're working with people and clients, is there anything that you find that people, traditional IT on-prem folks, aside from getting excited about terminology of on-premises versus on-prem, is there anything that they get excited, either don't get or have trouble grasping, or either do get or don't get or get excited about or can't get, or is it more, all this is just tech and it's just more of a process and culture issue of getting started?
I think it's a process and culture issue. I was a consultant for a period of time, and I would work with kind of the IT groups that initially they would not know how to code at all, right? And part of it was that they were exhausted. They had no time to learn it. They were fighting fires, and a lot of this wasn't, it wasn't to say that they didn't want to learn. It was just that they were very focused on the existing process that they did have. And it's hard to grasp and think differently about process when you don't know if it will turn out better or worse. And so it comes down to a lot of culture change and a lot of process too.
Yeah. Well, and we're not only become coders, but there is some DNA there about reliability and keeping things running, and there's a thinking style sometimes that I see out of infrastructure and IT that's a little bit different sometimes than a developer thinking style. And I don't know how to talk about it really, but there's definitely anyway, you get where I'm going. There's a lot of skill set to bring. It's a new set of tools, but all this can be mapped back to same. I mean, it's packets flowing around and things like that.
Yeah. And to be honest, it takes a lot for a developer as well to come in and learn this. It's important, right? It's hard to say to a development team, you need to start deploying your own queues. We're not managing them for you, right? So, the DevOps, ideas and philosophy, it's tricky. It goes both ways. It's hard. It's hard from a domain standpoint to bridge the gap between both.
Yeah. Nothing's a panacea. Well, hey, Rosemary, thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate it. And I learned a little bit, and I'm actually kind of, I've actually been typing on the keyboard. I actually got Python up and running on my machine, and I'm actually made my first app up in AWS. I'm actually, so maybe this events can be turned into a series of people teaching me how to do stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody can reach out if they're curious. So.
Hey, so the HashiCorp team will be there in force at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con, and you can see them around the country, etc. Rosemary, and we had your Twitter handle up, and so folks need to get a hold of you, and we're also happy to put people in contact directly if on the back channel as needed. Rosemary, thanks. Hey, have a good one. Stay warm, etc.
Thank you.